This is Appalachian Television Omni Media, improving America. 301. Local Wasteland time. If you're listening, it means the night still has a way of finding you. This is midnight in the Wasteland. I'm Nightwatch. Some stories come in heavy. You can hear the grief in them before the telling's half done. This one doesn't. Usually the tales I'm told carry a little dread in them, a shape in the trees, a voice where there ought not be one, something old, hungry, or mean enough to make a person check the locks twice and sleep with one eye half open. This story is a little different. There's a little settlement not far from the Morgantown Airport that seems to have developed a problem. Not a plague, not raiders, not bad water, though I'd expect they'd have that too. No, what they've got is a Sheepsquatch, and they call him Ralph. And the strangest part of it is, nobody there talks about him like he's a monster. They talk about him the way people talk about a fence gate that never closes right, or an old truck that only starts if you threaten it first. With annoyance, with familiarity, and against all good sense, with a little affection. The story came to me from a woman hauling salvage through the tower 2 nights back. Said she spent 3 days up near the airport settlement, trading nails, lamp glass, and 2 boxes of 38s for dried corn and decent gossip. She said the thing that she heard after she sat down by the fire wasn't about the weather or crop yields, or whether the responders might ever get their act together enough to be the people they need to be again. No, what she heard was Ralph got into the feed shed. Not yelled, not whispered. Said the way a man might say, "Your cousin's been drinking again." She asked who Ralph was. They looked at her, she said, with the kind of expression people wear when they realize a guest doesn't know the local weather pattern. Then one old fellow pointed past a tree line with his spoon and said, "Sheepsquatch," and went back to eating. Now, in most parts of Appalachia, if you hear the word sheepsquatch, the rest of the conversation gets serious in a hurry. People lower their voices, talk about tracks, blood, missing Brahmin, missing cousins, or the kind of noises that make a grown person reconsider the value of curiosity. Not there. There, they talked about Ralph, like a badly raised nephew, with too much reach, and no sense of boundaries. The woman told me that by the end of the first night, she'd heard 4 Ralph stories, and not one of them was told like a warning. First there was the feed shed. Seems Ralph had pulled half the side off of it, trying to get at the grain. Then he got himself turned around inside, and tore the rest of it down, attempting to leave with what one settler described as great wounded dignity. Didn't hurt anybody. Just stood there afterward in the moonlight, covered in splinters and feed dust, looking deeply offended at the building that had failed him. The second story involved laundry. Somebody had strung 2 long lines between poles out back. Clean shirts, patched trousers, a couple of dishcloths, and 1 very ambitious bedsheet. Ralph came through at dusk, walked into the whole arrangement like a man entering a conversation he thought was about him, and emerged wrapped in half the settlement's wash. They say he panicked at first, buckled sideways, kicked a bucket into the garden, tore 1 clean shirt right in half. Then, when the line finally gave way and dropped around his legs, he stopped moving altogether and stood there with a pillowcase hanging off of 1 horn, looking so ashamed of himself that nobody even had the heart to shoot at the ground near him. One woman said he looked sulky. That's the word she used. Sulky. Not enraged. Not feral. Sulky. Like the world had embarrassed him in public. And the more I thought about that word, the more the whole thing made a kind of crooked sense. Because a creature can be dangerous and still have moods. Can be big enough to flatten a fence line and still somehow carry himself like he feels misunderstood. That, more or less, was Ralph. But the main story, the one they all agreed upon, the one that gets told whenever somebody new comes through, happened 3 weeks back, on a gray morning, when the fog sat low over the road, and the runway looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. A boy from the settlement, too old to be called a child, and too young to have learned caution properly, had taken a sack of mute fruit peels and stale corn mash out past the fence to dump it where they always did. He didn't come back right away, which, in a decent world, would mean nothing. In this one, it meant 3 men grabbed rifles, and 1 woman grabbed a shovel, because practical people understand that if something has gone wrong, it doesn't matter whether the solution seems ideal. They found the boy halfway down the slope, standing perfectly still, not because he was hurt, because Ralph was there. Big as a bad decision. Standing broadside in the fog, with his head lowered over the spilled mash, like he had discovered religion. The men raised their rifles. The boy, without turning around, said the thing locals say when locals have made the grave mistake of becoming used to a problem. Don't. And one of the men, to his credit, asked, why not? The boy said, he gets worse if you shame him. Now I know. That sounds like nonsense. It sounded like nonsense to me too. But the settlement swore by it. Said if Ralph catches you yelling, or firing over his head, or running at him with all the loud certainty people mistake for courage, he gets stubborn. Not violent exactly, just impossible. Plants himself in the path, refuses to move, looks at you with the wounded expression, like you're the one making this difficult. So they didn't fire, didn't shout. The boy took 1 step back, then another, talking to Ralph the whole time, in the slow, flat voice people use on skittish Brahmin and offended elders. You got in again. You weren't meant to have that. You made a mess. Now look at you. And Ralph, however many pounds of horn, wool, muscle, and terrible judgment he amounted to, just stood there, chewing through spoiled mash, with the expression of a creature who knew he disappointed people, but not enough to stop. The woman with a shovel said it was the eyes that did it. Not soft, not sweet, just put upon. Like he had arrived in the world with great size, poor timing, and no reliable way of explaining himself. Eventually the sack tore open fully. Mash spilled across the mud. Ralph lowered himself to it, with all the solemn commitment of a guest refusing to waste a meal. And while he ate, the boy backed away. The others backed away. And the whole crisis resolved itself, the way some wasteland problems do. Not with victory, not with understanding, but with enough room for everybody involved to pretend that this had gone better than expected. Afterward, the old fellow with the spoon looked at the broken sack, the muddy tracks, and the half-crushed fence post Ralph leaned against on the way out and said, well, he's in a mood. That, apparently, was that. Now, I asked the salvage woman why nobody had simply put Ralph down if he caused that much trouble. She stirred her coffee a while before answering. She said that they talked about it, more than once. Then she shrugged and said something I've been thinking about since. Because, she told me, for all the trouble he causes, he ain't the worst thing that could live near a settlement. That may be the whole of it. Out here, people learn to sort their burdens. Some are the kind that you fight. Some are the kind that you flee. And some, through repetition, through exhaustion, through the stubborn little mercy of becoming familiar, just become part of the place. A leaky roof, a muddy spring, a door that sticks in winter, a sheepsquatch named Ralph who knocks over your wash lines and sulks when corrected. There is, I think, something almost comforting in that. Not safe. I wouldn't go petting him. I wouldn't turn my back on him if he was in one of his moods. And I certainly wouldn't build anything delicate between Ralph and an open sack of feed. But there are worse things than a danger that could be spoken of by name. Worse things than a creature whose bad habits have become local knowledge. Worse things than a burden everyone knows how to complain about. There's comfort, sometimes, in a problem you can prepare tea around. In a world like this, that may be as close to peace as some places ever get. So, if you find yourself up near Morgantown Airport someday, and somebody at a cook fire mentions Ralph the way your grandmother might mention weather, don't laugh too quickly. Every place survives by making terms with something. In their case, it just happens to be a sulky, oversized sheepsquatch with no respect for fencing and a talent for public self-humiliation. Could be worse. Usually is. You've been listening to Midnight in the Wasteland. I'm Nightwatch. I'll be here as long as the tower holds and the signal finds its way back to you. Until then, whatever trouble's made a home near you, whether it's grief, weather, memory, or several tons of irritated animal leaning on your fence line, I hope it's the kind you can live with. And if it isn't, I hope the night is kind enough to let you rest anyway.